All right, everybody, video is going to be a little different because I actually do some narration in this one, and I don't usually do that. So what this video is about is all 4.4 versions of the Pink Panther, and I'm going to go over the differences in each one. And we're going to start off here with, this is version 1. This is the car in its original MGB GT form. And funny story about this car is that my friend had it for sale for $1,000, and I thought that was too much for it. And then we were at a bachelor party together at a strip club, and he was drunk, and he's stumbled over and told me he'll sell it to me for $500. Well, I went to the ATM machine, pulled $500 out, and I got him to sign on the paper right there. I gave him the $500 and bought the car. But in its original form, the car had an MGB front suspension, or at least the front suspension was based on an MGB. And the rear suspension was a triangulated four-link, which you can see there. The links themselves, the angle of them is what kept the differential from moving side to side. So this is how I started off with the car, but then as time went on, I learned that triangulated four-links have a problem with suspension bind, and I did discover that when I lifted up the suspension on either side, you could feel that it was binding up. So I did eventually ditch that rear suspension design. But this is how it all started out. Here are some pictures of the early front suspension. Here you can see that it's basically an MGB front suspension, except for those top arms, which I made myself. But this didn't really work out very well, this style. So I pulled this all out and replaced it with a Jag, like a late '60s Jag suspension, which you'll see here right away. And yeah, here you can see the Jag suspension. I used the upper and lower control arms and steering rack, and I put a, and here it is all painted up. And yeah, so, but that did not, in the end, did not have very good geometry, and landed up having not enough camber gain and things like that. It didn't work out very well. Here's the car all painted and together, and we put it on a dyno to do some tuning with the V12. The glorious sound of that V12 is what I miss about that engine. It was heavy, it was not that powerful, only 300 horsepower, but the sound was the part of that engine that I really miss. The Jag engine did not last very long, and that is because the transmission input shaft was putting pressure on the crankshaft of the engine, and it just dropped all oil pressure. And when I pulled the pan, this is what I discovered. That half-moon shaped thing you see there is the thrust washer, and here's the bearings, the totally damaged bearings from lack of oil pressure, and that is, you can see there where the thrust washers are supposed to go. So I had to pull the V12 out and find another engine. All right, engine's all together, and I have no wires left over, so I think everything's hooked up, and I'm gonna start it for the first time, or attempt to start it for. Once I got the V8 tuned, it sounded pretty good too. I am really throwing the car around here at Speed World. I can't imagine being so aggressive driving it around inside there now. I wouldn't want to damage anything, but I guess at the time I was not afraid of damaging the car anyway. right, the new rear suspension is done on the Pink Panther, and I'm using a Wobbling, which is a little unusual, but here it is. Here's a demonstration. So going through its suspension, going up a little, and articulation. Let's see how that all works. These bars here, this one and this one that's sort of hidden back here, are attached to a link there that goes down. It pivots here. This is my roll center. So by loosening this bolt and moving it up or down, I can move my roll center up or down. And these are the push rods. These are the push rods that go to the shocks. These rods here hanging down are just for the belly pan. Don't worry about those. And these forward rods provide some stiffness to this cross member here, because this actually isn't very thick steel. I could have made it out of really thick steel to give it the stiffness it needed, but I decided to make it out of thinner steel and then use these forward struts. So you can see those. And they bolt up front. But there you can see through its suspension range. And the 3-link. And the shock, the rocker arms moving. That's how that works. All right, so there's the new suspension on the Pink Panther, and I really like it. Hope you do too. The Wobbling was a cool suspension design, but as you can see in this video here, the moment that it fails, the joints where it welded to the axle, actually there's very high tension on them, and they kept breaking. Now maybe with my newfound welding skills I'd be able to prevent this from happening, but back then I would weld it up and it would break again. And here you can see it's broken. This is the first time it broke. And here you can see I have changed to a panhard bar. So on the left it's attached to the frame with a slider that I can move it up and down. And on the right, that blue mount, that is a bolt-on mount that I got from Speedway Motors, and it's infinitely adjustable up and down. Funny thing is, I somehow in my changes to the car, I pulled that mount off and I got rid of it somewhere. I don't know where it is. And when I had to change recently to a new panhard mount on the axle, I actually had to buy another one of those, and I welded it on instead of bolting it on like it is here. Here we are in Lincoln, Nebraska, and this is our first pro solo. This is Bridget driving. She was very good at pro solo, really good reaction times. Anyways, the car landed up being hopelessly uncompetitive. We had a problem with wheel hop on the back of the car, and with understeer, and also the car was way too heavy. It was 2,250 pounds at this point. I mean, that's lighter than it was with the V12. With the V12, it was near 2,500 pounds. But it was still fun to drive, but we were way off the pace of everybody else. So after this event, I decided that something had to be done about the weight. So the next step was getting a bunch of weight out of the car. The quickest and easiest way to get weight out of the car was to turn it into a convertible. So when I got it back in the shop, I cut the roof off of it, and here my buddy Kirk and I are lifting the roof off. Those bars that went over top of the driver, I decided to change those to ones that went sort of down more so the car didn't look so weird. And unfortunately, when I cut those bars out, like you see here, I cut those bars out, the car sagged right in the middle, and the doors wouldn't open anymore. Because at one time, this car was a door slammer. It actually had opening and closing doors. Yep, here you can see the body lines don't line up anymore. And with a little bit of investigation, the reason for it was because I welded my main hoop to the original MGB. There's a box section that where the seatbelts and everything bolted to that was not as strong as I had anticipated. So the decision was made to go with a tube frame at this point. So here I did some early stuff with using wire, and eventually I had to learn how to use a CAD program to design the frame in CAD. So it gave me headaches, but I did eventually design a frame that worked within the body of the car. And here you can see the main frame rails first going down and the progress as things went on. At this time I was still planning on using that V8, but honestly it was too big and too underpowered and too heavy to use if I really wanted to be serious. And my diff was still, the pumpkin was still in the middle of the car, so I had to angle the transmission towards the differential so that I could join them up. Not a good idea. It would not have worked very well, but as you know, in the end I didn't do it this way anyways. So at this point I could have had two running and driving race cars if I had just realized that I wasn't going to use any of the old Pink Panther parts in the new one. But I didn't know at the time, and yeah, it's a regret. I could have kept the original car. But here you can see the progress on the tube frame car, trying to fit everything within the body of an original MGB. That yellow portion is actually the only MGB part left in the car. Whenever anybody asks, hey, is there any MGB left in this thing? That's the part. That's the only part that is original MGB. And some early suspension. I did not land up using these control arms, the upper or lower control arms, or the mounts as you saw them there. I landed up changing all that, making it better as time went on. These are my original lower control arms. These are the ones, I did actually use these ones on the car. They landed up not being strong enough, and I bent both of them. Once we got the braking figured out on the car, just under braking, I turned both those into S-shaped bends. So, and then finally we painted the car, and even with that plastic all around, there's still pink paint all over everything at Speed World. And here we're assembling everything for the first time. I'd already switched to the 2-liter Ecotech here, and that was the best decision, going with that engine. It's been a very good engine. And here you can see the diff is moved over to one side. I got a diff made from Strange Engineering that was moved over to the one side so my drive shaft would remain straight. Yeah, so this is kind of the final form of the car. A lot of this stuff has changed. Here I had 15-inch wheels and larger brakes, but I did eventually go with smaller brakes and smaller wheels. After years of wrestling with inside rear wheel spin, I finally pulled the pushrod suspension off and put Penske shocks all the way around on the car. So I had plenty of wheel travel, plenty of droop, plenty of compression, and this solved a lot of the handling problems of the car. After Spring Nationals in 2018 was over, I brought the car back and we did a color change, and we also did some improvements to the aerodynamics of the car. I built a better rear spoiler for the car and made some changes to the front splitter as well. I did not go as wide as I could have in the front splitter because I didn't think it looked very good, but anyways, we did the fluorescent pink, and this is yeah, if you have to see it in person to understand how bright it really is. It's pretty crazy, but I like it. I didn't know if I was going to like it, but I really do, and the car is pink now, and I painted the entire frame a satin black, so it looks pretty sharp. The 2018 Nationals, SCCA Solo Nationals, were soaking wet on day one. It was insane, but the car actually performed really well. It never had a hiccup or anything, and once I got my head around the you know, how fast I could go in the wet, I actually did really good. And for a while I was leading on day one, and I finished day one in second, and day two was completely dry, and I am just not as fast as some of the other cars in the dry. A lot of that has to do with my driving. I know that my driving is a problem. It's not so much the car, it is my driving. So I am working on that, but in the wet, seem to do really well in the rain. So I'd love to run Nationals in the rain again. Even though my results in the 2018 Nationals was really good, I was only 1.2 seconds off after 2 days off the leader. I still felt that the car could be better if it was lighter. When we rolled across the scales, we were around 1,850 to 1,900 pounds. And so what I did was, over the winter of 2018-2019, I cut out the entire roll cage. Everything above the main frame rails got cut out. That was 1 3/4 inch tubing, and I replaced it with 1.5 inch DOM tubing. And I also moved a lot of components around. Like, I moved the rear radiator forward, and I incorporated the pedal mounts and everything into the front roll hoop. And what this did was it pushed a lot of the weight of the car closer to the middle of the car instead of having it at the far ends. And so not only did I take 110 pounds, actually I landed up taking more than 110 pounds. When we went back to Spring Nationals this year, on the SCCA scales, we actually took 140 pounds out of the car just by changing the roll cage. And we improved the aero there behind the front wheels, and the front splitter now is as wide as it is allowed to be. It is allowed to be as wide as the rear bodywork, and that meant that I was able to widen it by 3 inches over the previous version. So there you can see my weight, 1555. That's on my scales, and my scales actually show 30 pounds heavier than the SCCA scales. And this transformed the handling of the car. It has always been a little understeery, but for the first time ever, it actually was a little oversteery at first, but we fixed that, and now it is completely neutral and very drivable and in all conditions. And even Bridget has so much confidence driving the car that she was matching my times at Spring Nationals this year. So it's very exciting, and I really am optimistic of how we're going to do at Nationals. I'm still praying for rain, but even if it's dry, it is so much fun to drive, and the car is so easy to drive that I'm expecting some good results if I can just improve my driving. I want to thank everybody who made it the full 20 minutes of this video. I know it's a long one, but I felt that people wanted to know all the different versions of the car and how we landed up here with version 4.4. I believe that this is the final version of the car. I really can't see making any more dramatic changes. Maybe going to a quick change rear end at some point, or maybe a rear end that I can put some negative camber back there. But otherwise, the car is what it is. It's down to, it's actually below the minimum weight for the class. It has plenty of power. It handles amazing. And I just need to improve my driving to take this thing to the top. So thanks, everybody. Please subscribe, give a thumbs up, and recommend this video to a friend. And read the latest Grassroots Motorsports magazine, which has an article on the Pink Panther.